Have you ever heard of a company called TSMC? While most people have never heard about TSMC, all of us are extremely dependent on the company. As of July 2020, TSMC controlled 51% of the entire global chip market.
TSMC founder Morris Chang drew a big crowd at his first public address of the year on Wednesday. Speaking at the Taipei Forum, Chang gave his view on why Taiwan is successful in the global chip sector.
When you look at consumer electronics, the numbers are just even higher. In terms of iPhones, supercomputers, and automotive AI chips, TSMC is responsible for 92% of production, while Samsung controls the remaining 8%. Considering their monopoly on the semiconductor market, I don't think you'd be surprised to hear that they're the 10th largest company in the world, coming in at $607 billion. Yet, the general public has never heard of TSMC. So, here's how TSMC became the king of semiconductor manufacturing. Taking a look back, the story of TSMC dates back nearly 100 years to a man named Morris Chang, who was born on July 10, 1931 in Ningbo, Zhejiang. A lot of Morris's formative years were during the height of World War II, so his family found themselves constantly moving around China to avoid areas of conflict. Initially, they moved from Ningbo to British Hong Kong, and this is where Morris would attend primary school. But by the time he was 11, Japan would invade and overtake Hong Kong, which forced the family to move to Shanghai, then back to Ningbo, and then to Chongqing. This lasted for a couple of years, but in 1948, the Chinese Civil War would break out, and the family would move to Hong Kong once again. Fortunately for Morris though, he was about to turn 18, which meant that he could attend college in a much more stable area. Morris initially wanted to be a writer or a journalist, but his father convinced him that engineering was a much more stable path. And with that, Morris would move to the US and attend Harvard University. He only stuck around at Harvard for 1 year though, as he would transfer to MIT during his second year. Morris would get his bachelor's in mechanical engineering in 1952, and he would instantly turn around and get his master's as well in 1953. Morris also pursued a doctoral degree from MIT, but he would eventually quit in 1955 after his thesis was rejected multiple times. Given that Morris already had a bachelor's and a master's in engineering though, it wasn't that hard for him to find a job. In 1955, Morris joined Sylvania Semiconductor, and he would work there for 3 years before switching over to Texas Instruments. And this is where he would spend the majority of his working days. Unlike many entrepreneurs who start a business during college or after a couple of years of work, Morris held his job till it was basically time to retire. He slowly worked his way up the corporate ladder and stayed at Texas Instruments for 25 years. In 1961, Texas Instruments sponsored Morris's PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford, and I think this is what really got Morris to stick around. After receiving his PhD, Morris got promoted to vice president and eventually president of TI. It wasn't until 1983 that Morris left TI when he was offered a job as COO at General Instrument Corporation. He only stuck around for a year though before he quit in 1985. At this point, Morris was 55 years old, and I'm sure he made plenty of money as an engineer and executive. So he could have easily retired, but instead he decided to partner with Taiwan and Philips and found TSMC in 1987. By the time TSMC was created though, legacy players like Intel, TI, and NEC dominated the market. And given that it took years to develop and manufacture advanced semiconductors, the barrier to enter the industry was quite high. But on the bright side, if you were able to cross that barrier, you had a great shot, as brand value doesn't mean that much in this industry. After all, consumers don't know or care about where these chips come from, so electronics companies just choose the most cost-effective supplier. TSMC's first chips were 2 process nodes, or basically 2 generations behind the competition. But Morris was able to make this work by pricing the semiconductors ahead of the cost curve. In other words, Morris took a loss at the beginning in order to attract customers, and he leveraged economies of scale to turn a profit. While simple in theory, this idea was extremely controversial in the 1980s, as it was extremely difficult to reach said economies of scale. So Morris was making a massive gamble with this strategy, but given that he was backed by Taiwan and Philips, he had some pretty deep pockets. Within 4 to 5 years, Morris was able to reduce the gap between TSMC and the legacy players to just 1 process node. And around the same time, Morris would take TSMC public in 1993 through the Taiwan Stock Exchange. 4 years later, TSMC would become the first Taiwanese company to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange. With the help of the public markets and the irrational dot-com bubble, Morris was able to continue his super aggressive strategy throughout the 1990s, and TSMC would catch up to the legacy players by the end of the century. TSMC had finally broken into the semiconductor industry, and they could have taken it easy by simply keeping up with the competition. But Morris had no plans of slowing down. Thus far, he had dedicated the company's efforts into catching up to the competition, and now he was going to pour in all of their effort into becoming the global leader. Given that he was over 70 years old though, Morris would hand over the position of CEO to Rick Tsai. Under Rick's leadership, TSMC continued to rapidly innovate their chips. In fact, between 2006 and 2008, Rick oversaw the company's biggest leap in manufacturing from 65nm chips to 40nm chips. But despite this fast progress, TSMC didn't grow all that much during this time period, as the global chip industry was experiencing a massive recession following the dot-com bubble. And it didn't take long for the 2008 financial recession to roll around. But Morris actually saw great opportunity through this recession. He witnessed the emergence of mobile technology like smartphones and tablets, and he was extremely excited to be part of this revolution. In fact, Morris was so excited and he saw so much opportunity that he would return as CEO in 2009 at age 78. It looks like Morris's primary goal with returning to TSMC was to make a deal with Apple. And in 2011, this would become a reality as Apple agreed to begin trial production of the A5 and A6 chips with TSMC. From there, it didn't take long for Apple to commit to working with TSMC for the long term, and today Apple accounts for 25% of TSMC's entire revenue. Anyway, after the Apple partnership was solidified, Morris announced that he was going to retire in 2013 and make Rick CEO again. But when 2013 actually came around, Morris decided to stick around for even longer. Not only was the mobile space exploding, but Nvidia and AMD were about to go on their own exponential runs. Nvidia started embracing the machine learning and AI industries in the mid-2010s as the PC market started to stagnate. In the meantime, AMD was basically employing Morris's strategy of pricing chips ahead of the cost curve with Ryzen, and this turned out to be a massive success and revitalized the PC industry. To make things even better, Bitcoin exploded in 2017, which resulted in crazy high demand for Nvidia and AMD GPUs for crypto mining rigs. And given that TSMC is the supplier for Nvidia, Apple, AMD, and everyone else you can think of, this boom directly carried over to TSMC. TSMC managed to break through their dot-com highs in late 2016, and profits started to grow exponentially once again. And with that, Morris would finally retire in June of 2018 at age 86. After Morris left, Mark Liu, who served as co-CEO, became CEO and chairman. Over the next few years though, TSMC started to stagnate once again. And though this makes Mark look bad, it's really not his fault. Morris is just really good at leaving at the peak. Anyway, though the company's growth slowed down for a few years, once the pandemic and supply shortage hit, TSMC would go parabolic once again. However, the supply shortage has not been all good for TSMC. Sure, their profits and stock price have gone to the moon, but the shortage has also drawn a lot of attention towards TSMC's monopoly. Basically, the entire chip shortage circles back to TSMC, and it's not particularly a good thing that one company has so much influence. So, many governments around the world have been trying to diversify chip production. For example, former President Donald Trump pressured TSMC into building a $12 billion manufacturing plant in Phoenix. Similarly, TSMC agreed to open a research and development facility in Japan. In the meantime, the European Union is trying to beat TSMC to 2nm production, but this is going to be extremely difficult. TSMC themselves are only on 3nm production, and they've never slowed down their innovation momentum. According to Peter Hanberry, if you want to compete against TSMC on 3nm, you're going to have to spend $15 billion this year, then $18 billion next year, and then $20 billion the year after that. And that's just 3nm. The European Union wants to beat TSMC to 2nm. The problem is that as technology continues to improve, it becomes exponentially harder and more expensive to take the next step. So it's basically impossible to just step in and compete against TSMC. You would likely need a budget of $100 billion to beat TSMC to 2nm in a short period of time. And though the EU can technically afford that, it's unlikely that they'll actually make such a large investment. As more time goes by though, it'll just become even harder to challenge TSMC. So maybe the EU will bite the bullet, but we'll just have to wait and see. While TSMC is no doubt a monopoly, it could be argued that TSMC has thus far been an ethical monopoly. They haven't voluntarily jacked up prices or slowed down innovation or been involved in any sort of corruption, even though all of these would have been super easy given their influence and control. TSMC is actually extremely strict about ethics and integrity. Just a few months ago, they fired 7 employees for leaking information about Apple's upcoming chips. Since Morris founded TSMC, the company has centered around 4 core values which include integrity, commitment, innovation, and customer trust. While these sound super cliche, TSMC's history over the past 34 years has shown that TSMC has indeed upheld these values. I mean, just take a look at how Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang talks about TSMC.
Because I think that Morris, his career, his philosophies, TSMC, its strategies, its core values is absolutely a study in industrial revolution. There's no question about it.
Hearing that, I think it's pretty clear that the world's biggest companies don't work with TSMC because they have to, but because they want to. And as long as that's the case, maybe the TSMC monopoly isn't all that bad. Do you guys think that something has to be done about TSMC? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you're grateful for TSMC's chips. And of course, consider joining our Discord community to suggest future video ideas and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.